Hi everyone, let's talk about early Christian writing. Now, there's a problem because oftentimes when people think about the early Christian writing, they think of, well, the church fathers that are like the 1st century, 2nd century, and 3rd century. But you have to actually start a little bit before that in the actual writings of the Bible themselves. Now, for those of you who aren't previously acquainted with the contents of the Bible, and I shouldn't assume that everybody is, Christianity is developed based upon belief in the writings of the New Testament. The New Testament is 27 books in the back end, the latter half of what's considered the Bible. Now remember, the Bible is a collection of 66 books written over the course of about 1,500 years. Now, there's divided into two sections. There's the Old Testament, which is 39 books, starting with the book of Genesis, all the way through the Law, the Prophets, and the Writings, ending in the book of Malachi. And how those are arranged and how the order that those are placed in is a longer conversation. The point is that those books that Christians call the Old Testament constitutes Hebrew Bible. And those collection of sacred writings is what Judaism would consider a sacred text, and they use those in addition to supporting documents and supporting explanatory texts, use that as their sacred Bible. So Hebrew Bible was the Bible until the New Testament comes along. And the only reason why the Old Testament is called the Old Testament is because early Christian writers wrote letters or wrote stories or wrote what's called the books of the New Testament, and that became the New Testament. And the reason why it's called new is because they considered themselves as adding on to the sacred writings that was the Hebrew Bible at the time. Remember, Christianity started not as Christianity. Christianity began as an early Jewish heresy, basically, a sect, S-E-C-T, a sect of Judaism that broke away from the main Judaism of the 1st century in Palestine under Roman rule. They broke away from that because they were following the teachings and following the life and beliefs surrounding this early teacher, this rabbi, this Jewish teacher, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, that Jesus is a historic character, that's verifiable through other historic writings like Josephus and others that can verify that a Jesus occurred and that there's some support that he lived at the time. But Christians go way beyond just the historic figure of Jesus of Nazareth. They actually believe the writings of the New Testament, which is all written by Jesus' followers. Now these followers, they get labels for them. They get referred to as disciples, even referred to as apostles. But these are the early followers of Jesus of Nazareth. And they have these early writings that describe in their words what Jesus of Nazareth said and did. Now, we have according to Western Christianity, I described a little bit of how there were some other gospels that have been attributed to Jesus that weren't received within Christianity. They were considered to be less credible and not having the credentials and the authenticity to be included in Christianity. So early Christianity, just within its own internal confession, doesn't think that Jesus ever wrote anything. In fact, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are kept as kind of a separate category because they describe the life and words of Jesus, but they're not special. They are the writings of Jesus' early followers. So even when people try to say, well, we don't accept it, this is something sometimes where I have friends when I discuss this with early Muslim friends, and they say, well, we consider the Gospels to be authentic, but not the rest of the writings of the apostles. I'll kind of offer a little bit of pushback and say, well, remember that Jesus never wrote anything. So all of it is the writings of the apostles. Even the Gospels are all the writings of the apostles. So Christians place their faith on the writings of the apostles, and they consider all of that to be valid and trustworthy, and Christianity is based upon that. So you really can't separate out the Gospels as certain, in thinking of the ethical and moral teachings of Jesus versus the ethical moral teachings of the rest of the apostles, because it's all the apostles' writing, even though some of it has to do with the life and times of Jesus, and the rest of it is letters to churches, letters to the Romans and the Corinthians and so forth. Even further on, when you have the apocalyptic writing of St. John the Divine, who writes the Revelation of Jesus Christ, which is the book of Revelation at the end. So the New Testament is these 27 books that early Christians all wanted to basically tack onto the Hebrew Bible, and so it's considered new because it's post or after the life and times of Jesus, and it's considered to be an addition to. And so Christians and Jews differ in the sense where Judaism has Hebrew Bible, and it's a closed canon. You don't add anything to that. But early Christianity thought that the life and times and work of this Jesus of Nazareth warranted adding more to those Holy Scriptures, adding more books to that so that it would be more complete as they expanded the list of sacred texts that is to them would be the Bible. Judaism would not consider that valid, but Christianity does, and that's why they give the Hebrew Bible the name Old Testament, and the writings of the Jesus followers is considered the New Testament. Well, the earliest Christian writings would be that, the New Testament. Those 27 books that include the 4 Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, which is like a book of the early history of what happened immediately afterwards, and then the writings of the apostles to various different groups of people, like in Galatia and in the towns of Thessalonica and to the Corinthians and so forth. So the writings of the apostles, the Gospels, and all of those books have their own authors, have their own context. They, in many cases, their own writing style. And they're all written in a version of Greek at the time that, well, remember there's all these New Testament books are written in Greek at the time, and they've been translated through 2,000 years and translated into various different languages where it gets disseminated out. Early on, it gets translated into Latin so it can be disseminated across the Roman Empire. It gets translated into German as it continues to go on into Europe, and now we have it translated into English from the oldest manuscripts that we can find. So, and typically the English translations are, as I understand and as I've read into translation work, typically the English translation you have is very faithful and very reliable in terms of conveying what is written in the original text. But it's always important to realize that English wasn't their first language. This was all written in Greek at the time. And at the time, there was 2 types of Greek that were really available to write in. There was the classical Greek, which was the Greek of philosophers and Greek of the high society. And then there was the common Greek, or what's called Koine Greek. And the New Testament is written in the common Greek, or the Koine Greek. Basically the street language at the time to the more common language. So the greatest number of people would be able to understand it. So the New Testament is written in this common Greek. Now, the life and times of that occurred is under the Roman Empire. It's a first century Greek thought is still very much permeating the culture. Those writings deal with that a great deal in terms of Greek thought, different competing religious thoughts at the time. But also, the early Christian writers are also steeped in Hebrew tradition. Remember, at the time the New Testament is being written, at the time that the apostles are writing the New Testament, the only Bible that they have available to them is Hebrew Bible, which is what we call the Old Testament. So a lot of those ethical and moral assumptions that they would have embedded within their writings is informed by their version of the Bible at the time, which would be Hebrew Bible. So for that reason, we can expect a great deal of continuity between the writings of the Old Testament and the writings of the New Testament, because so much of that carries forward. But Christianity and Christian thought throughout the centuries has had to deal with the discontinuities. There is much that overlaps between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's much that overlaps, but there's considerable amount of that differs as well. And so there's the continuities and the discontinuities. The things that get repeated in the New Testament that were found in the Old Testament, proscriptions or prohibitions or different admonishments about moral and ethical behavior. But there's also things that are discontinuous or things that are not included in the New Testament. Stuff you find in the Old Testament that doesn't occur again in the New. For example, in the Old Testament, you would see examples of wars that take place and different battles that happen, and where you have a nationalistic faith, whereby the people of God is seen in collective, wherein they can do battle it's considered perfectly acceptable to put up a defense or even go on the offensive and to go against their enemies in some way. Where in the New Testament you have a different ethic with regard to pray for one's enemies, forgiving those who spitefully use you, and the often quoted phrase of turn the other cheek. So you have to account for what are the continuities from the Old to the New Testament, and what are the discontinuities and why. What's changed in that time, in the cultural assumptions of the time, or in the literature, or even what's changed in the belief system. Christian thought has had to deal with, why does the New Testament teaching about some subjects differ from the Old Testament? What got updated? What got augmented as a result of the life and the times and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth? This is what makes Christianity distinct, and in some cases, why early on it was incompatible with early Judaism as it continued to migrate away from Judaism and become more of a Gentile or non-Jewish entity all its own, and migrated west across the Roman Empire, eventually including all of Europe. So these are the early Christian writings, but because of the complexity of these writings and how they come together, it presents us with some challenges. For example, I even mentioned I mentioned in other places here, the fact that slavery exists in the world of the ancient Near East, and even in the Roman Empire. Well, there are different places within the Old Testament and the New Testament where it seems as though it's addressed tangentially in terms of how one is to behave ethically and morally toward their slaves, but slavery is never outright condemned, nor is it, and no one even approaches abolishing it. So if that's true, if you don't see a call for an abolition of slavery within the Bible, by what standard and by what rationale would later abolitionists in the early American antebellum period, would be driven by, in many cases, Christian missions and Christian abolitionists in the American antebellum period, what would drive them so to try to see an end to slavery so much? Harry Beecher Stowe's powerful 19th century book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was very much driven by the underlying assumption of Christian love. And that is embedded with it throughout her literature, of this drive for the abolishing of slavery out of a sense of Christian love in the 19th century. What would drive that if the Bible, particularly the New Testament, doesn't specifically condemn slavery and call for its abolition? Why would later Christians arrive at that idea? And what would be the ethical development? What's the evolution of Christianity over time, whereby someone would decide, well, the New Testament teaches this toward people, and our natural outgrowth of that is, in our present day, that same attitude toward people requires an abolition of slavery. That's something to wrestle with, how it is that someone could extract from sacred text an ethic that it doesn't specifically state, but later on seems to be required of them in the present day. That's something to consider as you think about early Christian writers, how the New Testament is shaped, how it comes together in a literary way, and its implications over time, how that evolves through church history and through philosophical developments, such that in the present day and over the last 200 or 300 years, we would wind up having ethical and morally clear choices, and then state that somehow we're inspired to do that from the Bible, even though the Bible doesn't address it. This is a complex way in which the Bible and Christianity uses their sacred literature to arrive at ethical and moral standards, but it's a complicated process that we have to navigate through. So, anyway, for some of you, that may be new information about how how looking at the Bible, looking at how the Bible comes together, and what it's comprised of, and how it can be used, or may sometimes even misused. But we'll continue this discussion as we go. But right now, I want you to think about how the complexity of that literature is used to either form one's ethical, moral framework, and sometimes can even be misused to, in the opposite way, right? Thank you.